Okay, I said this a minute ago, but let's go ahead and write it down because it's that important. Matrix multiplication is not commutative. Order does matter. And again, I said this earlier in the notes, but A times B in matrices does not equal B times A. And so you're going to have to just be careful with that when you're putting it into your calculator. Let's talk about how to solve these. If this was just a single number, we would divide by that number and we would get our answer. But it's not a single number, it's a whole matrix. And so let's just call this matrix A, for instance, and let's call this matrix B. If we want to solve this, then we have to find the inverse of A. That is, we need to take A to the negative first power times that one, and A to the negative first power times this one. Anything we do on the left side, we also have to do to the right side. All right, so I'm going to go back to my calculator. I'm going to re-enter what I have for A and B. It would be maybe easier to call these C and D, but let's just stick with A and B for now. We'll call the next one C and D. So we're going to go to our calculator. All right, so again, we go to second matrix. We want to edit the first one. Well, one thing is we want it to be a 2 by 2, so we don't have to change that. You can just arrow down off of it. Looks like not. You have to either keep entering and finally you'll get over there. All right, so this needs to be 2350. And then we need to quit out of here. And then we need to go to second edit or second matrix again. We need to edit. We need to arrow down to B. And we need to change it, at least I do, to go to a 2 by 2. And this one is 312015. Now I'm going to go to second quit again, just to get out of here. What I want to do here is I want to multiply the inverse of A times B. So I need to go to second matrix names. I have A. I want to take the inverse of A, and then my times, I'm just going to use the times button here, and I'm going to multiply this times matrix B. So I'm going to say second matrix names, and I'm going to go down to B and choose it. And so see on my screen I have A to the negative first power, which is the inverse of A, times B, enter. And this is my answer matrix, 0, 3, 1, and 2. All right, so I have my answer matrix is here. I'm not going to do it because I can tell this video is getting really long, but we could check our answer by taking this matrix times A. We would need to do it in the right order, but we could take this matrix times A. It should come out to be matrix B. So A times X should equal B, and we could plug that into our calculator and try it. But like I said, I know this is getting too long, so let's move on. Another example on number 4, again, because this video is getting long, let's maybe save this and do this in class tomorrow, okay? All right, the last concept here, which is important, because it's like, why are we doing all these things? These things are taking forever, and even on the calculator they take forever. By hand they would take even longer. Well, one thing is, the main thing is, we use matrices to solve systems. So do you remember last week we were doing all those systems with 3 variables and they took forever? Well, guess what? You can use your calculator and solve them, okay? So that's kind of why we're doing it. One thing is here, if we have this system, we can change that into a matrix and solve it using a matrix. So I've got the steps listed out here. Step 1, write the linear system as a matrix equation, AX equals B. All right, to do that, we write out the coefficient matrix, multiply it by the matrix of variables, and that should equal the matrix of the constants. In other words, I'm going to change this to matrix that is 2, 5, 1, 3. That is the 2 and the 5 from this equation and the 1 and the 3 from this equation. And I'm going to multiply that by the matrix of variables, which I'm going to label X and Y, because those are the 2 variables I have. And that should equal the matrix of the constants, that is 3 on the top and 2 on the bottom. If I set up my system like this, then I can solve this system without doing elimination or whatever. I can just do it on my calculator. All right, so now we need to plug in 2513 into our calculator. I'm going to call it A just so that I know what it is. But I'm going to plug that into my calculator, and then I'm going to find A inverse of A. All right, so we're going to go back to our calculator. So your answer here for your inverse is 3, -5, -1, 2. That should be your inverse matrix that you got on your calculator. If you had a hard time finding that on your calculator, you ought to ask either in class or before or after school, and I can help you with your calculator. Okay, step 3, multiply the matrix of constants by the inverse of A on the left. And I'll tell you what I mean by on the left. But what this means is we're going to take the inverse of A. So we're going to take the inverse of A times matrix A. We're going to leave that xy, that variable matrix in there. Notice since I did that on the left-hand side, I also have to do the inverse of A on the left-hand side of B. So when I do the inverse of A times A, those cancel each other out. They become 1. And so now I have x over y as my variable matrix. And now I'm going to go to my calculator. And I'm going to take the inverse of A times B. I'm going to enter that matrix B, which is 3 on the top and 2 on the bottom. And I'm going to get my answer. So in other words, I'm going to multiply these two matrices together. This is the inverse of A. This is matrix B. So take a minute on your calculator to do that. Okay, when you do that, you should get this answer matrix. This answer matrix, what this means that x is -1, because the x and the -1 correspond to each other, and y is +1. So my solution for this system is -1, 1. Okay, once again, as just a 2-variable system, that might have been easier to do by hand, by elimination or substitution or graphing. But when we start getting into 3-variable, 4-variable, 5-variable, we can see that this is going to make it much, much easier. Okay, we really covered a lot in this video. Make sure you write down your questions in the margins. Okay, anything that came up that you didn't understand, please write it down. Let's also just talk about a summary. What some things are we could say for a summary. Okay, one thing that we talked about today was the identity matrix. And the identity matrix, if you have a 3x3, for instance, is 1, 1, 1, and the rest of them are zeros. So that's the identity matrix. That's something you need to know from today's lesson. We talked about how to use a calculator to find the inverse matrix, and we show that by an a to the -1st power. That means inverse matrix. And this is something you need to memorize your steps for, so make sure you're working on how to do that with your calculator. We talked about how to use inverse matrices to solve equations, and we also talked about that order does matter in matrix multiplication. All right, sorry about the long video. There was a lot to cover. Make sure you bring your questions, and we, again, as always, will work on this in class tomorrow.